Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. We have been away for quite some time, and we're going to address that, I think, in a different podcast where we catch up on everything that we've missed, which has been like about a year's worth of stuff. But we really want to get back into doing this podcast again and making sure that we are keeping up with it consistently. But I think it's probably just before we get into the race today in Spa, which has just finished, it's probably worth reintroducing ourselves. So I'm James, and we've got Chris here with me. Hi, Chris.
Hello, I'm back again. I had a brief blip away for work during Baku last season, and then we just sort of ran out of time because James was getting married, and there just wasn't enough hours in the day to plan everything and get the podcast recorded. But we're back now, and that is super exciting. It's just a shame we haven't got a super exciting race to talk about today.
Yeah, we really thought that Spa would be a good one to come back to because it's Spa. But as we've just seen from the race today, it ended up being a little bit processional. We had Max Verstappen, who was the bookies' favourite to win the race, despite the fact he started in 14th. And of course, he did go and win the race. I think we're going to talk about him a little bit later because I want to try and talk about lap one, because that's probably when the most action happened. Checo had a pretty bad start. Sainz got away really nicely. And then, of course, there was that collision between Hamilton and Alonso. And as we spoke about just before the podcast, as we were preparing for it, it is a bit of a non-issue because Lewis did apologise he didn't apologise. He said he was at fault for what happened. But he was trying to go around the outside of Alonso, didn't give him enough space on the inside, got thrown up into the air and damaged the floor of the car and had to retire. But I think the main thing to talk about, Chris, is that it was really disappointing because Lewis looked like he was really up for the race today, even if the car wasn't particularly good.
Yes, and I think what's really been missing this season is the only two drivers, I think, who can bring anything to Verstappen, especially while Verstappen's looking at this dominant, are the two Mercedes drivers. And they haven't got the machinery. So seeing the Mercedes fly off the line with Hamilton, work its way up to, well, I suppose seconds briefly while in the air, made you think that perhaps this wasn't going to be a case of Verstappen barging his way to the front and dominating the race. And losing Hamilton just sort of felt like it had taken all the fun out of the race by the first lap. And I think, sadly, that is kind of what happened. He admitted he was at fault. At first, I felt like, looking at the replays, Alonso had squeezed him. But Hamilton accepted it was his issue. He went for a gap that didn't exist, which maybe makes him twice a racing driver in Senna's estimation. I'm not sure. And yeah, just got it wrong. And it feels a bit odd to watch Hamilton get it wrong, doesn't it? Because even this season, which has been his worst season in a while, he still doesn't really tend to make silly mistakes like that. But he did. And unfortunately, I think it cost us a more interesting race.
It did. And also, it leaves him quite far behind the top five now in the championship. He is sick out of that top six of those three teams that we see who are in the top three in the Constructors' Championship: Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. And when you look at the table, when you look at the championship, obviously Max is almost 100 points ahead of Sergio Perez in second place. But then you've got from second to fifth is separated by 21 points. And then fifth, which is George Russell, to sixth, Lewis Hamilton, is 24 points. So the gap is starting to increase. And when he's having races like this, where, as you said, it was an uncharacteristic mistake. I know that he had collisions with Verstappen last season, but I think in all of those you could say they were racing incidents or 50-50. Well, I know the one in Silverstone, he did get a penalty for that. But you can still see that there are those 50-50 moments where this one, he said Alonso was in his blind spot. He turned in, didn't give him enough space and ended up flying in the air. And so I think that's more the key issue here, is that he's got no points and now he's fallen behind the top five.
Yes, I mean, I think he was on that fantastic run, wasn't he, of 5 straight podiums up to today. And you really felt off the line he was going to be getting another podium today. And it's only really today and the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix that have caused him to fall behind. But Russell's been so fabulously consistent. He has never finished lower than 5th, only one DNF. And he just keeps chipping away at the leaders, while Hamilton's had 2 great second places in Hungary and France. It's just not quite consistent enough. A non-points finish for the first time in ages, 10th place in Saudi, and a 6th place in Miami. Oh, I suppose an 8th place in Monaco even. Just isn't the reliability he needs to try and stay in the fight. Well, there isn't a fight, is there? Let's be honest. There's absolutely no way either of the Mercedes drivers, even the more reliable Russell, is going to win the title this season. But it would be nice to see him still competing. And I, for one, certainly want to see him get that win. I think it would be great for him to keep that win streak going once a year. But it feels like it's more likely to be Russell that does it now, even on the strength of today, where he didn't look like he had the car to bring it forward. Although obviously he's done quite well this year, Russell, because he's been consistent in a way that his teammate hasn't. But you just feel that the only one of the 2 Mercedes drivers that can just wring that extra 10th out of the car is Hamilton. And when Hamilton's out, that's the big shock response to Verstappen gone from the Mercedes point of view, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So who is Verstappen's main title challenger at the moment? Because Ferrari are just shooting themselves in the foot constantly. We've seen that all season. Even today, they pit Leclerc to try and get the fastest lap. He then ended up speeding in the pit lane, came out behind Alonso, or he was overtaken by Alonso on the penultimate lap, managed to get back past him and set fastest lap, and then got the penalty, which bumped him down a place again behind Alonso, so they lost the points there. And then you've got Checo, who is consistent as a number 2 driver, but you look at the difference in pace today between Verstappen and Checo, and I mean, he's just miles ahead. So who's going to be putting up the biggest fight against Verstappen for the second half?
Nobody can. The drivers who I think would be best equipped to fight Verstappen don't have the machinery to do so. And the only drivers with a car that can do it, Perez, Leclerc and Sainz, for whatever reason, are just unable to. And it's ridiculous, really, because Verstappen's won 9 races this season. And Leclerc, who up until the end of Miami looked like he was probably going to be the close nip and tuck title challenger this year, has just won 3, and it's been awful. And it's not that he's only won 3, it's that he's thrown away so many other good opportunities. Stupid retirements like in France, where he was out in front and it all went wrong. Poor strategy calls like today, like in Hungary, like in Monaco, bringing him to the pits and then going, oh, no, stay out, when he's already in the pits. These are all the things that are just preventing anyone from getting near Verstappen. You're right, Perez is the second driver that Red Bull have been looking for ages. He's not enough of a threat to Verstappen to unsettle the team hierarchy, but he is good enough to pick up the points on the days that Verstappen isn't there for some reason. Sainz, I think, has been as good as Leclerc. There's not much in it, is there? 15 points between the 2 of them. And he got his first win in Britain this year as well. But that's still nowhere near consistent enough from either of the Ferraris to get near Verstappen. So what you're getting is a Verstappen whose confidence is growing and growing and growing, because not only is he supremely quick, his rivals are just falling over their own feet, and his teammate poses no threat to him. So the only competent driver pairing in the top 3 teams, Russell and Hamilton, are lacking the power this year to compete with them. If Mercedes come up with a better car next year, I suppose we could see a good title fight. And I feel like the driver of this season has arguably been George Russell. But yeah, can you see anybody in F1 this season that is anywhere near Verstappen in terms of car and ability.
Yeah, I mean, not looking at today's race. I don't need today's race to tell me that Verstappen is the best driver, but I think today was just the clearest example of it, where, you know, Leclerc started one place behind Verstappen, and nobody thought he was going to be challenging for the race win, did they? Whereas you look at Verstappen and think, well, it's one of his home Grand Prix. He was formidable throughout the weekend in quali. I mean, again, it just kind of shows you what Red Bull are doing, in the sense that when you look at qualifying yesterday, Ferrari were using Leclerc to give Sainz the slipstream in when he was going for his final lap. Obviously, he messed the lap up a little bit, but Ferrari were trying to use every advantage that they could. Red Bull didn't even bother. They didn't bother giving Checo that toe, because they gave Verstappen the pole position, and they knew that many other drivers were also going to have their penalties and bump down the grid, and so he could get the win from there. I would like to talk about Ferrari a little bit, because everybody has been doing that over the summer break, because their shortcomings have been very publicly broadcast throughout the last few races, and they were kind of using the summer to have a bit of a reset, to try and just reboot what they have been lacking over the course of this season, especially in the middle part. And it doesn't really seem like much has happened. What is going on at Ferrari, and what can they do to resolve the issues that they're facing?
What is going on at Ferrari? I don't understand how you can be probably the most prestigious name in global motorsport and be unable to hire competent strategists. Are there rules about only hiring Italians? People not wanting to relocate? Why aren't people coming to work for Ferrari? Because it's quite clear the existing strategy team is woeful. Even teams like Haas seem to be making better decisions on a regular basis than Ferrari. And perhaps it's more noticeable because you feel the Ferrari should be winning. And there's been a couple of high-profile moments this season where Leclerc has been denied a win that he should have had by the strategy. But both the Ferraris, seeing today coming into pit for the fastest lap completely unnecessarily and ending up losing 2 points as a result. The risk reward in their strategies is ludicrous. Sometimes there's a high reward for low risk and they don't take it. Sometimes there's high risk for a low reward and they're falling over themselves to force the drivers in to do it while the drivers are saying no. And it's not like last year when we saw Norris nearly sneak that win, only to not have the experience. He should have pitted for wets. This is a multi-billion-pound racing operation who have arguably the best car and just have no idea what to do with it. If I was Charles Leclerc, I would be looking around for whose contracts might be expiring at a top team in the coming years, because I don't think I'd want to sit through another couple of years of having title challenges thrown away by poor decisions. And he's made some poor decisions himself. I think before this season, everyone thought it was a matter of time until Leclerc became world champion. But I'm sure I'm not the only one that started to question whether he's missing that little 1% you need at the top that, say, Hamilton and Verstappen have, that Vettel demonstrated during his Red Bull years, something Ricciardo has shown he doesn't have. And does Leclerc have that? I don't think so. Be interesting to see when he's properly in contention whether Russell's got it. But on this evidence of this season, I suspect he probably does.
Let's talk a little bit about Verstappen before we move on to talk about Ricciardo, who you mentioned just then. And obviously, he's had quite a difficult summer break so far. But we'll talk about Verstappen quickly with this win. I think that we're all expecting him to win the title this year. He's got the confidence from last year. Obviously, the title win was in very controversial circumstances, but it was clear that he was the only one that could match Lewis Hamilton and his Mercedes, and now Red Bull have got the best car on the grid. But I do want to talk about the difference between him and Checo. As you mentioned, Checo is the perfect number 2 driver, but I think I was hearing a lot of things over the summer that Checo really sees himself being a title contender, and that he thinks that he can push Verstappen a little bit further. How realistic is that? And do we think that Verstappen is just too good?
I think it's too late. I think Perez has proved himself one of the best drivers Red Bull has signed in their tenure as a Formula One team. Absolutely. But Verstappen is already up there as an all-time great. If Verstappen retired tomorrow, people would still talk about him in revered tones. And I don't know if I see Perez, who's not the youngest driver on the grid, being able to put together that level of sustained success in order to really challenge for the title. It's not impossible, and if Red Bull have the best car next year, Perez certainly seems more comfortable in it, and I'm sure we'll make more out of it. But his qualifying is nowhere near good enough. He's good coming from the back through. Drivers like Verstappen had today, you'd always bank on Perez to get something out of that. But has, like Leclerc or Sainz or Ricciardo, has he got that extra couple of percent at the top just to elevating? I'm not sure he does. But it is nice to see him have that determination and that resolve to attempt it. Because I think for many drivers, sitting back and just going, well, I'm not going to beat Max, I'll just bring the car home in second and that'll be comfortable, would probably be enough. But no, what I would love to see him do, I would love to see Checo Perez be world champion, especially seeing, as we mentioned before, we both live in Mexico, and it would probably be some sort of national holiday. But can you see it? Because I can't.
No, not at all. Not even next season. I mean, I know that anything can happen. And Checo, I can't imagine him still driving for Red Bull when the regulations change in 2026 and we get those new cars. I can't see that happening. So no, I can't. But I just like you, not just because he's Mexican and we live in Mexico, but because we haven't seen a Red Bull teammate fight since the Vettel-Weber days, really. Well, I mean, for titles, I know that Verstappen and Ricciardo were probably relatively evenly matched when they were teammates, but we haven't really seen a proper title fight between Red Bull teammates. And it seems Red Bull maybe were a little bit scarred by what happened with Vettel and Weber, and they've always wanted this number 2 to match their superstar number 1 driver, whoever that might be. But no, I can't see Checo doing that. In the same way that I can't see Ferrari being that title contender, or Leclerc or Sainz being that title contender. In the same way that when Vettel moved to Ferrari, and we thought we were going to get a Hamilton and Mercedes, a Ferrari and Vettel title fight, which we never really got because Ferrari and Vettel just didn't have, what it took to win. I think that we're going to get the same with Leclerc and Sainz. Even though I do think Leclerc and Sainz are both very good drivers, yeah, I think they might be missing that 1%, which means I think that for next year, what we're hoping for is Mercedes to get their act together and give the 2 drivers a car that can actually challenge Red Bull for the title. Let's move on to Ricciardo, because it's funny how we're going to talk about Ricciardo when actually the whole process to get to him started with Vettel deciding to retire or announcing his retirement. Then you've got Alonso, who wanted to jump ship from Alpine and move to Aston Martin on a multi-year deal. So we're going to see Alonso in Grand Prix racing till he's about 65. And then Alpine announcing Piastri as their second driver. Piastri then posting the fact that he's not going to be their driver because it's likely that he's going to be moving to McLaren, which then led to the fact that McLaren were looking to dump Ricciardo basically and to cut the contract out. Do we think that this was the best decision for both parties, for McLaren and Ricciardo?
I feel bad for Ricciardo. It was a genuinely tough watch, the video where he announced he was leaving. And there was the footage of him after the race today, sat alone in the garage looking absolutely miserable. But he's had a very poor season. Remember, 2-3 years ago, we still thought Ricciardo was a future world champion. And he's 14th retired, 6th, 18th, 13th, 12th, 13th, 8th, 11th, 13th, 9th, 9th, 15th, 15th. And his teammate is just behind Lewis. Well, not just behind, but he is a place behind Lewis Hamilton, 7th in the championship. Kevin Magnussen in the Haas is 2 places clear of Daniel Ricciardo. You would struggle, I think, to justify keeping him. But more critically for Ricciardo's future, McLaren are clearly assuming the Piastri contract negotiations on Monday are going to go in their favour. But if they don't, and Piastri has to go to Alpine, there are no realistic, decent choices for Ricciardo. He probably could go to Haas, although that is dependent on Schumacher moving. He could probably go to Williams for Latifi, but would he do better just to cut his losses and go and race in NASCAR like he obviously wants to? He could leave as a genuine Formula One cult hero, and not that many drivers get to do that. If you can't win a world championship, which the vast majority of the drivers can't, why not leave as a popular driver who's well remembered as a talented racer? And I think it's too easy to do an Alonso or arguably a Vettel and just dilute a legacy that was at one point so great. And while I don't think you can honestly say Ricciardo's ever hit those highs, if he spends a couple of years as a back marker, no one will remember those shining days when he looked like he might have a title, when he was fighting as Verstappen's equal at Red Bull. A young Verstappen, but Verstappen's equal no less. It's why I think Rosberg quit when he did, because he knew he could quit while he was ahead, be well remembered as the guy that beat Lewis and not the guy that beat Lewis once and got spanked by Lewis 6 other times. So what would you do in that situation? If you had 2 back markers or 1 midfield team that you just left, which they were very disappointed about, would you attempt to go back to the midfield team? Would you go to the back markers? Would you leave the sport and do something else you've always wanted to do?
I think when you're looking at Ricciardo, and what is he, 33 years old, and he's looking at other drivers like Vettel, like Alonso, like Raikkonen, who was in the sport for a long time, like Lewis Hamilton, who are all pushing towards 40 and still racing. I know Vettel's going to retire this year, but essentially they're all kind of, Formula One drivers can stay in the sport for a lot longer nowadays. And I think that he'll be thinking that if there's an opportunity at Alpine where they have realistically had a good season compared to others. I mean, they're ahead of McLaren. They're 4th in the table right now, so they're best of the rest. I think he would probably look at Alpine and think, well, actually, if they offer me a contract, what that means is that they're willing to let go my departure. He will probably think that his departure from Alpine was justified at the time because McLaren had a much better car, especially last season, where they did really well. And so if he can come to that, if they can let bygones be bygones with each other, then I think he would certainly take that Alpine seat back. But it is incredibly uncomfortable, I think, to have to go back to that team that he left to try and do better and, improve himself. And in fact, he's just ended up being worse. It's been a terrible move, despite the race win that he's had with McLaren. It's not gone well. And so it depends how desperate he is to stay in the sport. And if he's that desperate, then he's going to Williams. Then there's no question in my mind. If he is that desperate to stay, and Alpine are going to be looking for somebody else to take that seat, and they're not going to go back to Ricciardo, then he's going to Williams. If I was Ricciardo, then yeah, I would think, I don't think there's any chance that he's going to get into a team that like he was at a Red Bull. He's not going to go back to Red Bull. He's not going to be in a Mercedes seat when Lewis retires. He's not going to go to Ferrari because they've got two drivers who want to be at Ferrari, who are probably not going to leave. And realistically, they're the only teams that are going to be competing for titles. And as we've said, Ferrari, we're not sure about. So yeah, he needs to, from an outside perspective, where we don't know anything that's going on between him and whoever he's talking to, and in the paddock, we're just two people talking about Formula One. From an outside perspective, he should absolutely be leaving the sport and going to do something where he can be successful somewhere else. Formula One is regarded as the pinnacle of motorsport, but that doesn't mean that you are not successful if you haven't won something in Formula One. I mean, he's won 8 races, let's be honest. He's an 8-time winner. And you go on to do something elsewhere. Jackie Ickx, who was at the Grand Prix today, is revered as a brilliant motor racing driver, but he didn't. He was very competitive in his time, but he didn't win a world championship. But then, he's a however many time Le Mans winner. He's highly regarded as a fantastic driver. And so he can do that. He can create that legacy for himself. And it's a shame. It's a real shame, I think, for him in the situation that he's in. It is sad, but I personally think McLaren have done the right thing. I mean, if you're building the team around Lando Norris, you're bringing in someone like Oscar Piastri, who looks talented. He looks like a very good driver. You're building for the future in that sense. And I think that's what McLaren need to do.
Yeah, McLaren have absolutely made the right decision. It just, when a driver is as popular as Ricciardo is, it does sometimes feel, doesn't it, as if you're losing somebody. But realistically, one win separates Daniel Ricciardo from Mark Webber, just as one win separated Juan Pablo Montoya from Daniel Ricciardo. Like, that's quite, he's had 2 less wins than Valtteri Bottas. And that's not a bad career, to be honest. He's done well for himself. And he could go to America and do enormously well. He's popular there. There's a huge influx of F1 drivers, 3 ex-F1 drivers in NASCAR, a series he's been quite open about wanting to join this coming season. Why wouldn't you go and see if you could be great at other things? There are so many other drivers like Jackie Ickx who excelled outside of Formula One while still finding success within the top category, that you could easily go and be a Le Mans winner or an Indy 500 winner or whatever it's not the Piston Cup, that was cars, wasn't it? But whatever the thing you get for winning NASCAR is.
You can tell we're not NASCAR fans. The Piston Cup.
Yeah, so why doesn't he just go and do that and have a great time and be loved and be fondly remembered? And everyone will forget that he petered out at the end of his one career. They'll just sort of say that he had his time and he was great while he was a great driver at Red Bull. And he had that great win. He's McLaren's last winner, etc., etc., etc. Go and do that. Go and have a good time. I think he's deserved it. But he is, as it stands, he will see some more points before the season's out. So I imagine he'll beat his 2013 Toro Rosso total, which was before they changed the scoring system, just. But yeah, he's on for his worst season since 2019 when he scored 54 points and came 9th. He's only got 19 points and there's only 8 races left.
Yeah, I mean, he's closer to the bottom of the table than he is to his teammates. So, again, that says a lot. And yeah, well, from an outside perspective, it's very easy for us to talk about and say that he should go, but, maybe that's the right decision. 2 more things to do with Formula One that I want to talk about surrounding the sport. I want to talk about the fact that Audi are going to be joining the sport in a few years' time. But just a real quick word on Spa. Just before the race today, it was announced that Spa have signed a 1-year contract, so it'll be on the calendar for next year, which is fantastic. Anybody who loves Formula One loves Spa. It's a fantastic track. We saw some pretty interesting overtakes today on the Eau Rouge corner and down the Kemmel Straight, but also in other parts of the circuit as well. It's legendary. It's the longest track on the circuit. It's had many glorious races there. We're happy to see it back on the calendar, but the future doesn't look particularly bright for it, does it?
It's difficult. Like Silverstone, it doesn't get government funding, so it's got to try and stump up the cash itself, which in an age when oligarchies and I suppose gambling companies are massively funding races elsewhere in the world, it's very hard to do. It's finally making those upgrades to the Eau Rouge Rallye section, which it needs to because it is unsafe. But that requires building an artificial hill. It requires diverting a small river. It requires all kinds of things. And these things are not cheap. And if Belgium wasn't Belgium, it would have gone, wouldn't it? Let's be honest. It would have been, it would have been consigned like Hockenheim, another great track, to the sort of the dustbin of history. But it's pretty much every driver's favorite track. It's exciting to watch. It's fun to drive, and it's managed to hang on. So hopefully that 1 year will be enough time for it to sort out its long-term future. Because while Spa will be fine as a track, it's got plenty of sports car racing, for example. I think it's an integral part. As Formula One really, really feels like it's going into an era change, you know, the way that it did when it translated out of the early 90s into the early 2000s, and the sport became so much more professional. You lost all the little backmarker privateer teams, and you lost these people that turned up for 3 races and then vanished again. And it turned out the team was owned by like a cigarette company from Nigeria or something. We're doing it again, and we're seeing a move away from those traditional tracks towards more spectator-oriented entertainment, particularly with new markets in the US and marquee prestige races in places like Saudi Arabia. But Formula One is great, I think, for its history, not necessarily for its racing. And getting rid of the historic tracks, you know, Monaco, does Monaco deserve to go? Monaco probably does deserve to go, but you feel that little thing, like when you're doing a spring clean and you find some small item you know you should get rid of but can't quite bring yourself to part with. That is Monaco. That's arguably Spa. What classic tracks do you think still merit a place beyond perhaps Silverstone? Is the only classic F1 track that I think still has a strong. Monza is the other one. Unrivaled.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, Monza. I think Monza and Silverstone. Silverstone's a great track, and I think that's the thing about. I know we say that about Spa as well, but Silverstone often has. Spa can be a bit hit and miss, I think, with great races, like we saw today. Today wasn't a brilliant race. Last season we didn't get a race, whereas at Silverstone we can normally, you know, talk about it each year and say this was a really good race. And again, it's the kind of historic home of Formula One, isn't it? Monza, you've got the Tifosi, you've got the fact that it's, you know, been on a Grand Prix calendar since the 1920s, and it's still a relatively unique track with its layout. And so Monza, I think, certainly still deserves a place there. And yeah, maybe we're just holding on to these things too much, but at the same time, Formula One is a European sport. It is historically, you know, set in Europe, and like you said, that's where its history lies. And so if you start to move away from that, then maybe you start to dilute what the sport actually is. And I think you mentioned about new markets and new fans really coming to the sport. And I think however many years ago when Liberty Media took over, we were thinking, you know, it would be great to have a stronger fan base for F1. It means that we will probably get ultimately better racing, better drivers and better racing, because the more money that's invested in it and so on. And it's not under this kind of stranglehold of one person in terms of Bernie Ecclestone. But I think, and this might seem completely pointless to some people, but for me, there's a clear indication of some things that are not quite working with F1 in that sense, which is when there is an overtake on track, when something happens that is quite important or exciting, they cut to the crowd reaction. So say Verstappen passes Hamilton for the lead of the race, they will cut to the crowd to see the reaction. Now, I don't care. I don't care what the crowd are doing. I don't care that they're celebrating. Of course they are, because they're going to cut to the orange army of Max Verstappen, who's just overtaken somebody, and they're going to see them setting off flares. But that's not what Formula One is about. But again, there's this idea of reaction shots. We have to see what everybody else is feeling and thinking. And I understand the concept of it, building up the atmosphere, and now you can hear the crowds over the engines, that adds to it as well. But for me, that tiny little thing says a lot about where maybe F1 is going, and I'm not particularly pleased about that. And so obviously from a historic point of view, Spa should be signing a 300-year contract and always be on the calendar. But, unfortunately, that's maybe not the case. But speaking of evolution in Formula One, Audi are joining the sport in 2026. They've given themselves a couple of years to maybe prepare a car that can, really hit the ground running when it joins. They didn't confirm. They confirmed that they would be an engine supplier, or they would supply an engine, but they didn't actually say whether they were just going to do that or whether they were going to be their own independent team, even though they did sort of produce a car with a livery on it and stuff. Well, where are they going to fit?
They've acquired Sauber Group, haven't they? Or Sauber Group's racing operation in Formula One. So I think we can probably assume that Alpha will just transition over to Audi with, you would imagine, a larger budget, which would be nice. I think another, not that we have big spenders anymore with the salary cap, but another team with the resources to genuinely compete and acquire top talent is what Formula One needs. But part of me thinks if Audi isn't starting their own 11th team, am I personally hugely bothered? Is it another, Aston Martin, a historic name, has joined the sport by acquiring another old team with no money? Porsche is considering a return to Formula One. Well, it is, but it's just going to buy out Red Bull powertrains, and it's going to be Red Bull Porsche. It's good that other manufacturers see Formula One as a market worth investing in. Absolutely. I think it makes the sport more sustainable. I think it opens up. Audi have done okay in other racing categories. So they're not coming from nowhere. They're not a privateer outfit like this Andretti entry which I'd probably actually like to see more, if I'm honest. But is it a lot of Liberty Media hype that Audi are here because it sort of helps to solidify their sport as a prestigious one at a time in which they're chucking out F1's history left, right, and centre? Or is it momentous because Audi are here and they are the next Mercedes? Because you could have been forgiven for saying all these same things about the Mercedes acquisition of Brawn in 2010. And I probably did say all these things about the Mercedes acquisition of Brawn in 2010. So without an independent new constructor, I find it hard to get excited. I want to see more drivers on the grid. I want to see more teams, more races where more can happen. And I think in the cost cap era, if you are recruiting people like Audi, you aren't going to have HRTs, you aren't going to have Virgin Racing Marussia. You're going to have teams who are at least there or thereabouts. Look at the fact that the salary cap this year seems to have mostly closed up the fields. Haas is now competitive. Williams, while Latifi is letting the side down a bit, has seen 4 point scoring finishes. Yeah, 3, 10th, 9th and 10th, and are mixing it up. The bottom 10 is Alfa, Haas, Aston Martin, McLaren, Alpha Tauri, Haas, Alpha Tauri, Alfa Romeo, Williams, Aston Martin, Williams, Aston Martin. So, at the bottom, it really feels like anyone can score points now. And I think bringing in a new team who could also score points would make that even better. But are we just getting a rebrand of a team that's not really set the world on fire in the 4 years it's been in F1? It does feel a bit like that to me, I think.
There's some lessons to be learnt there, isn't there? Because you're with Aston Martin, who came in with such promise. I remember when we started this podcast, you predicted that they would come third in the constructors. I predicted they would come fourth, then ninth. They are the second bottom team in the table right now. They are not ever considered a team, right? This season, certainly, they're not considered a team that are going to be challenging for points on a regular basis. They are not getting into Q3 and qualifying on a regular basis. And they took over a Racing Point team that had won a race, just before they took over. You had Checo winning with Racing Point, and you had a team that potentially looked like it was on the up. They've taken that and so far turned it into a team that is, has got two dogs for cars. And so there's that very strong warning sign. Obviously, Aston Martin can recover and improve in the coming seasons, but they've got Alonso joining, some even more experience joining the team. They're tied into Lance Stroll, so really, realistically, what they've got is an opportunity to have one very good driver and one Stroll, whatever he is.
He's a good midfield driver. I've always been to bat for Stroll, and I'll do it again. If Stroll wasn't there on big money, you wouldn't think he was as bad as he is. If he's had relatively all right results when he's had the car, but he doesn't have the car this year, and it's more obvious. But sorry, back to what you were saying.
Well, but then you've got, like you mentioned, Mercedes. But that was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. That was a long time ago that they came in and they did that. And now, I don't think I'm not saying that it's more complicated now to build a better car. And I know that a lot of the brands in the Volkswagen group have said we're not entering Formula One until there's more of an emphasis on the biofuel and the hybrids and stuff like that, which now there is, and so that's why they're all starting to come in. But they've got these warning signs, Audi. But I think what I like is that they've given themselves 4 years basically to work on this car that can be turned into something that could be quite special. Audi as a name carries weight. It has something that's there, just like Aston Martin. And so, but the Aston Martin one always, to me, felt a little rushed, a little kind of outwardly projecting this amazing thing, but actually inwardly there was panic. And there's this, how can we throw this money around? What can we steal from everybody else to try and get a car that can do something? And it's all kind of fallen flat. And maybe Audi will have a more of a thoughtful process coming in. That's my hope anyway, because I agree. The more teams, the better. I want to see 26 cars on the grid. How amazing would it be? So we'll see how that pans out. But I think that's all we've got time for on the podcast today. It's really nice to be back. Please do like and subscribe, because we are back and this is happening. We will not leave you in a lurch like we did last time. We want to continue with these and really see out the end of the season. And obviously we're going to see Verstappen win the championship. I don't think either of us have any doubt about that. But we're still going to get some good races. I think Formula One is still more exciting than it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next weekend.